We are live.
Thank you. Good morning. This is a convening of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. I'm Jordan Maynard, and I'm serving as interim chair. It is currently 10:03 a.m. on Wednesday, September 11th, 2024, and this is a public meeting, number 530. We are holding this meeting virtually, so we will take a roll call. Good morning, Commissioner O'Brien.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning, Commissioner Hill.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning, Commissioner Skinner.
Good morning.
And I am also here. I do want to acknowledge that we are convening on the anniversary of a somber day in United States history. Massachusetts was home to many brave Americans who lost their lives on September 11, 2001. It's also home to many people who joined in service and sacrifice in the days, weeks, and years to follow. I know that I speak for my fellow commissioners in saying that all of us at the Massachusetts Gaming Commission are taking time to remember all of those who were lost, their legacies, as well as their families and friends they left behind. I would like to begin by setting the table for today's meeting. Through public comment, the MGC was made aware that some individual patrons were being limited. These patrons have claimed that they were given no notice as to why, how long, or when, if ever, they can return to wagering. Some asked for us to consider whether a sports wagering operator should be allowed to limit the amount an individual patron may wager. To help inform the Commission further on this matter, we held a roundtable on May 21st, 2024. I'm not someone who likes to look backwards, but for the record, all the operators initially indicated they would participate, but only Bally's showed up. The rest contacted us to withdraw their participation. With that said, we are glad that they have joined us today, and we look forward to this discussion. I know there are strong opinions on all sides of this issue. The Commission is interested in learning from our licensees, betting stakeholders, and the responsible gaming community. This will not be the last opportunity we take to educate ourselves, and we are here with an open mind and a desire for dialogue. We aim to hear a variety of diverse opinions. We understand that not every opinion held or specific circumstance experienced by a patron will be represented over the course of our meeting today. In legalizing sports wagering, the Massachusetts legislature sought to strike a balance to provide a marketplace for sports wagering operators to offer responsible access for Massachusetts residents who choose to sports wager, and for the state to collect the associated tax dollars. The Commission moved quickly to stand up this industry, to bring the legal market to Massachusetts, and in turn, direct residents away from the illegal market. By the way, it took just over 6 months from bill signing to the first bet. We are proud of the team here at the Commission and their dedication to responsibly standing up this new industry. I'm confident that the Commission, our licensees, and our stakeholders are all aligned on the goal of ending access to the illicit sports wagering and casino markets. Let me be clear. Illegal operators do not provide financial security. Illegal operators do not provide cyber and data security. They do not care about responsible gaming and those who battle addiction. Not to mention, they do not contribute to our Massachusetts tax base. Illegal operators prey on Massachusetts residents. They do not play by the rules, and they are not subject to the public scrutiny that comes along with being licensed by this Commission. They are not our partners. If you want to sports wager in Massachusetts, the operators in this meeting are the safest bet. We appreciate the stakeholders who are here today, and we respect that some questions may be difficult to answer publicly. This Commission is required to meet in public view, and that transparency ensures integrity and it bolsters the public confidence. Today's discussion will be held in 2 parts. During this first part, we will be joined by representatives of our sports wagering Category 1 and Category 3 operators. Following a conversation with our licensees, we will take a short break and we will then be joined by representatives of patrons, responsible gaming, and alternative sportsbook models. Shortly, I will open up the conversation to my fellow commissioners who can ask any question at any time. I do ask that we please direct all discussion through me. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I will not preside over a disrespectful meeting. Let's be kind to each other while we are learning. So, with that said, we will begin the discussion with our operators. I would first like to give each of them an opportunity to briefly introduce themselves and their team. We will go in alphabetical order. We'll start with Bally's.
Good morning. I'm Justin Black. I'm the Director of Compliance for North America at Bally's Interactive. Along with me today, I've brought Thomas Berman, who's our Director of Sportsbook Operations, and John Streets, who is our VP of Sports Operations based in the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Our friends from BetMGM.
Good morning, commissioners and staff. My name is Sarah Brennan, Senior Director of Compliance with BetMGM, and I'll kick it to Jeremy.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. My name is Jeremy Coleman. I'm Deputy General Counsel at BetMGM.
Thank you both for joining us. Caesars.
Good morning, commissioners and staff. Lisa Rankin, VP of Compliance and Licensing. And I have with me today Ken Fuchs, our SVP and Chief Operating Officer.
Thank you both for joining. Our friends at DraftKings.
Good morning, commissioners. My name is Jake List. I'm the Senior Director of Regulatory Gaming Compliance at DraftKings.
Good morning. I'm Pete Harrington. I am Senior Counsel at DraftKings.
Thank you for joining. We'll now kick it over to Encore. Hi, Jackie.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us here. My name is Jackie Crum, Senior Vice President and General Counsel for Encore Boston Harbor.
Thank you. Our licensees at Fanatics.
Good morning, everyone. Commissioners, I'm Alex Smith, Senior Vice President for Legal and Regulatory at Fanatics. I'm joined by Mike Levine, who's our Senior Regulatory Counsel.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you both for joining. We'll now kick it over to FanDuel. Hi, Corey.
Good morning, Interim Chair Maynard, members of the Commission and staff. I'm Corey Fox, Vice President for Product and New Market Compliance, and I'm here by myself this morning.
MGM. I see Gus.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Gus Kim, Vice President and Legal Counsel for MGM Springfield, and I will have Dan introduce himself.
And yes, thank you. Good morning. Daniel Miller, Director of Compliance at MGM Springfield.
Hi, Dan. Yes. PPC.
Good morning. I'm Sam Haggerty, Deputy Chief Compliance Officer and Regulatory Affairs Counsel for Penn Entertainment, and I'll let Adam introduce himself as well.
Hi, good morning, Commissioners. My name is Adam Cates. I'm the Vice President of Interactive Compliance for Penn Sports Interactive.
So I'm going to assume that takes care of PSI too. And with that, thank you all for participating today, and we look forward to this informative discussion. I'll kick it off with the first question and then free to the floor to the commissioners to follow up. Please detail how and why a patron may be limited on your platform, including how you may limit patrons on an individual basis. Who would like to take that one?
BetMGM can kick that off.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak with the Commission today. And as you know, we have had multiple conversations leading up to today's roundtable with staff, and I've appreciated the dialogue up to this point. To properly explain how and why a patron may be limited, we think it's probably helpful to first discuss broadly the tools we use to manage risk and liability within our sportsbook. As you know, our goal is to provide the best customer experience to the majority of our patrons, which means providing them with competitive lines, odds, and a wide variety of markets to bet on, while also managing our risk to ensure that the outcome of any single event or series of events does not pose undue risk to our business. The risk management framework is essential to sustainability, not only for BetMGM, but to the industry as a whole. The decision to impose a wager limit is based on multiple factors that align with BetMGM's overall risk management framework. Specific wagering patterns, irregular behavior, bonus abuse, and more are used to determine what stake factor to designate a patron. There is no one-size-fits-all decision in this process, as we all will outline. To effectively manage risk, we limit a small minority of patrons that we consider to be advantaged players who attempt to take advantage or find ways around our risk management framework. This group of limited patrons, many of whom self-identify as professional bettors, are loud in insisting that limiting patrons is a pervasive practice by operators. However, this is not accurate. It is actually the opposite. BetMGM limits approximately 1% of Massachusetts patrons presently, and it is our ability to limit that small minority of advantaged players that allows us to continue to offer competitive lines, competitive odds, and a wide variety of markets for the 99% of non-advantaged players that play with us. My colleague who's here with me, Jeremy Coleman, will provide some additional details on our broader risk management tools and the how and why we limit these advantaged players. Jeremy.
Thanks, Sarah. And thank you again to the commissioners and staff for having us today. So to talk more specifically about this, as Sarah mentioned, in order to properly understand how limiting advantaged players fits into our risk management framework, it's worth first discussing some of the internal risk management tools that we use broadly that apply to all patrons. So this is not an all-inclusive list, but some of those tools do include general market and event bet limits. So this is where we will set a max bet limit for an event generally that is not specific to any one patron. Another tool is our ability to suspend markets when news that may impact the outcome of an event breaks. For example, if an injury occurs, we may suspend a market or multiple markets to give our traders time to appropriately adjust that line or take down a market if necessary. Another tool we use is in-play delays, where the platform will take time to process an attempted in-play wager. This is to protect against a latent or slow feed coming into our system, or court-siding, which is something we see advantaged players do quite often. For those of you that may not be familiar with court-siding, it's when a patron is either at an event, him or herself, or receives information from an individual that is at an event in an attempt to place in-play wagers on outcomes that have either already occurred or potentially they are in the midst of occurring. And before we have an opportunity to adjust the in-play lines, these advantaged players will try to bet on these in-play markets, thereby gaining an advantage on that market, on that wager. Another general tool that we'll use is high liability limits. So this is when we will automatically suspend a market if one side of an event is overexposed. So if one side of an event has too much money on it, 80, 90%, whatever that limit might be, we may suspend that market to give our traders time to effectively change the line, take down the market if necessary, whatever they feel is necessary. And finally, even our general ability to move lines is a risk management tool that we use, right? As I just mentioned, high liability limits may automatically shut off a market if we reach a certain exposure level. But if we notice too much money coming on one side, we may choose to move the line up, move the line down in order to keep our risk in an area where we feel it's appropriate. Now that we've discussed some of these general tools, in addition to those market level tools that apply across the board, it is true that we limit a very small minority, approximately 1%, of patrons that we consider to be advantaged players. We look at a number of different factors to decide whether or not a patron should be limited. But it's worth noting that these factors focus on the behaviors and the betting patterns of the patrons, and they're not merely result driven. So some of the patterns that we'll look for, and again, this is not an all-inclusive list, but to provide some color, some of the patterns that we do look for include things like capitalizing on errors. So this is when advantaged players will consistently search on our platform, on our app, for errors in odds, errors in lines, or other similar errors, and attempt to take advantage of those errors before we can change the lines, fix the error, take down the market. Another thing we'll look for is syndicate betting. This is when a large group of patrons will all bet simultaneously on the same market and event. In many cases, they will move as a group to take advantage of errors, as I just discussed, or to capitalize on an event where they believe they have an edge. Again, this makes it very difficult for us to manage our risk when all of these advantage players are moving together. Another pattern that we'll look for is wagering in inconsistent amounts. An example of this may be if you have a patron who consistently bets $25, that's their average bet size, and then all of a sudden they bet $5,000 on a specific market to capitalize on an error or something of that nature. And finally, another pattern that we'll look for is betting on lower liquidity and higher volatility markets. So this makes it difficult to manage our risk. An example of one of these markets may be a less popular player prop, which has higher volatility. So a small change in circumstances may affect the line greatly, and lower liquidity. The smaller player props, we want to keep them open to protect the 99% of non-advantaged players that simply want to bet on our app. But it can be risky when advantage players try to take advantage of those lower liquidity, higher volatility markets. And finally, we talked about general betting limits and general event limits. Another thing we'll look for is patrons wagering on similar or related markets to circumvent those limits. So for example, we may put a $10,000 bet limit on an NFL game. And an advantage player who feels they have an advantage on that market may bet $9,900 on that line. They may then bet $9,900 on a line 0.5 above and 0.5 below, specifically trying to circumvent the general risk management event wagering limits we have in place. So this is sort of some of the general factors we look for. And as Sarah mentioned, our ability to limit this very small minority of advantage players that engage in these types of behaviors, that's what allows us to manage our risk so that we can continue to offer the best product with the most competitive lines, the most odds, the most markets to the 99% of non-advantage players who are not looking for a specific edge. They simply want to be able to place a bet in the regulated market with all of the protections that were previously discussed. They want to bet on their favorite player, their team, or whatever outcome they may think is going to win. I want to discuss the how a little bit to answer the second part of that question. So how do we limit these players? So as I've mentioned, one of the risk management tools we use is to impose maximum wager limits on events. Those apply across the board. And the limits will vary depending on the event or the market or other circumstances. So those specific patron limits that we're discussing today, they're implemented by assigning what's known as a stake factor for each patron. The stake factor is essentially a multiplier that's applied to the general market limit and corresponds directly to how much the patron is permitted to wager on a specific sport or event or market. So for example, a patron that has a stake factor of 1.0 means that they can bet to the market limit imposed by our team. If a general market limit on an event is $10,000, as I mentioned before, a patron with a 1.0 stake factor has a max bet on that market of $10,000, 10,000 times 1.0. Now, if we observed advantage play using some of the patterns of behavior that we previously discussed, the team may choose to factor an individual down to impose the limit that we're discussing today. For example, an advantage player that's factored down from 1.0 to 0.5 would only be permitted to wager 50% of the general market limit. In other words, using the same hypothetical, if the general market limit is $10,000, the advantaged player who is stake factored to 0.5 would only be able to bet up to $5,000 on that market. Finally, I want to note that risk management focuses on the activities of a patron in wagering and not the results of the patron wagering. As these patrons are advantaged and are taking advantage of the systems, the result is that they may sometimes win, but our process is certainly not intended to be results driven. It's rather driven by the particular patterns of wagering we discussed and the patterns of wagering that these patrons try to take advantage of our risk management framework. It's not by the results. Happy to answer any questions, of course.
Thank you, Sarah and Jeremy. Commissioners, do we want to start with questions on that piece and then open it up to other operators? Commissioner O'Brien, I see your mic is off.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to ask a couple of questions, but I don't know how my fellow commissioners feel.
I'm fine with that.
Fine.
Okay,
I have a couple questions of my own.
Okay.
So we'll start with Commissioner O'Brien.
Sure. So Jeremy, thank you for the overview. When you say the team may decide to factor someone down, can you be more specific? What's the team? Is it players? Is it AI, et cetera? Can you answer that?
Sure. So I will try to give as much information in the interest of transparency as possible. As we mentioned at the beginning of this call, we do feel that some of the specifics of our risk management framework are proprietary. So anything that we can't answer here, we are happy to follow up with staff confidentially, as we've done before, or in executive session. But generally, I'll say that our trading team, who are the experts in this space and managing our risk and setting the lines and moving it, that is the team that's making these decisions.
Okay. And Alexander Walder, Senior Manager for your trading compliance, is he not on today?
He's not on today. He unfortunately is not feeling well. So Sarah and I are covering today.
He also is in, he's a senior manager of trading compliance, so he would not be touching player accounts anyway, or doing that analysis.
Okay, so what is the part of the agency, your office, that would be the team you just described, your trading team?
This group falls within the operations department within trading. So they have visibility into patron account activity.
Okay. And following up on that, in terms of, and again, I understand your position in terms of confidentiality or trade secrets, but is there a use of AI and analytics that's involved in that?
I frankly don't have enough information to answer that. I would leave that to the experts on the trading team. So I don't want to give inaccurate information.
Okay. And there's no one from the trading team on this call today, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I'll yield to Commissioner Skinner at this point.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Brien. And also, I will say, while we're waiting, if anyone does have information related to Commissioner O'Brien's question, I'm sure we would welcome that answer. Commissioner Skinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sarah and Jeremy, thanks for the presentation. You've given us a lot of information to chew on right out the gate. And so bear with me as I try to formulate my questions. I get the gist, Jeremy, of your description, the theme, if you will, of advantage players, but could you define what an advantage player is in your own words?
I don't think there's any one specific definition. One of the things that we do is we look holistically. We don't make limiting decisions based on any one factor. It is the multitude of factors that I discussed. And again, I do have to defer to the experts on our trading team who do this day in and day out, but it is a 24-hour monitoring type of thing on whether we limit, how much we limit, whether we take somebody off of limiting based on the behaviors that we see.
And can a casual or recreational bettor be deemed an advantage player? Is there ever a situation where they would fall into that advantage category and therefore subject to the risk management tools that you've outlined?
Sure. I hesitate to say never on anything. Again, we will look at the patterns of betting behavior to determine whether or not we think we need to limit somebody as part of our risk management framework.
So that's a yes to my question. It sounds like that the average or casual bettor could in fact be deemed an advantage player, depending on their betting activity.
I'm not sure the two things are mutually exclusive. I think that somebody may self-identify as a casual bettor, but if they are engaging in the things that we talked about, like consistently capitalizing on errors or syndicate betting, or specifically looking for edges, court siding, lower liquidity markets, then we may consider them to be an advantaged player and a player that we need to limit in order to keep our risk management framework in a zone where we feel we can operate sustainably for a long period of time.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for now, Mr. Chairman.
So Commissioner Skinner and I see Commissioner O'Brien. Can I move to I would like to move to Corey and kind of get some reactions from some other licensees to these lines of questions we've already had, if you don't mind, Commissioner O'Brien.
Yeah, could I just throw out that if to the extent they can speak to what BetMGM said, right? So it's apples to apples, that would be helpful. And I'm particularly curious also about the court siding. If whoever's going next could comment on that as well.
Thank you. And understanding that there is some proprietary information, I'm sure, across companies. So Corey.
Yeah, sure. So thank you. And I want to get to several of those questions. I think broadly, FanDuel Sportsbook's risk management system is similar, though not the exact same as what Jeremy and Sarah described. But our wager limits allow us to manage our liability exposure and avoid unsustainable losses. They do sometimes limit individual users for a variety of different behaviors. Some users are looking to pick off pricing errors. Some are arbitraging our prices against other competitors. Some are hoping to gain an advantage by court siding, which is being present at a match and front running what our feed is able to do in terms of setting prices. But I think it's important to keep in mind, on an average day, FanDuel takes wagers on 2,700 unique events and over 37,000 different markets within those events. So, in limited cases over all of those markets, some users may have more information than we do. Some users may have a better model than we do. We're comfortable taking wagers for them, but we have to do it in a responsible manner that protects our company. To add a little context to this, I wanted to add that in 2023, 0.043% of the wagers placed with FanDuel in the Commonwealth were placed at the maximum amount allowed for that individual. So to Commissioner Skinner's question, I understand why Jeremy was not willing to say it's never possible for a recreational user to be limited, because lawyers don't like to say never. But at the same time, it's important to recognize this is a very limited set of users, a very small group who ever get limited. And I think, I can only speak to FanDuel. And I think if you look through the comments the commission received, you can see that most of them were not complaining that FanDuel was limiting them, because it's just a very small group who are being limited.
So Corey, if I may, thank you for that answer. I do think in part the reason we're here today is we're talking about sub-percentages of sub-percentages, right? There could be people who may be misidentified, to Commissioner Skinner's point, and her question, I believe, was part of the point. In so much that we're trying to drive average bettors who are not abusing the licensees into the legal market and out of the illegal market, understanding that we just had a report from Dr. Volberg saying that, we're not as successful on that front as we want to be in Massachusetts. That's part of why we're here today, right? Let's get that. We want to find a way to make sure that those bettors are getting into the legal market. I see Jake just took his mic off. Did you have anything to add? Oh, and then it went off as soon as
No, I'm potentially waiting for your question, but I'll wait for you to finish.
No, so feel free to comment on any of the above that we just discussed and what Corey just discussed. Okay.
No, I mean, all I was going to add is, as the previous speakers have mentioned, when we're talking about limiting, it's limiting a behavior. And I think that's more the focus than is this a person customer type A or type B? So like if someone's behavior, irrespective of what their previous behavior was on the platform, becomes exclusively or primarily court siding, which has been one of the key examples, then we might limit that person from court siding. That doesn't mean that they're not free to use the platform in all of the other ways that are available to bet on DraftKings or one of these other operators. We would be tailoring, the action to that specific type of behavior, and the customer may well have lots of other attributes, recreational or otherwise, that we don't need to exercise any type of control to balance the trading book.
And Commissioner, if I may pick up on the question, agree with you. We're talking about sub percentages of sub percentages. You know, across these operators represented today, you're looking at companies that manage millions of accounts. You know, if perfect is the goal, none of us are going to get there. But so I will say, you know, this is not a problem unique to risk management. You know, I oversee a team of responsible gaming professionals. They may restrict or suspend an account for responsible gaming concerns, and we may get that wrong. The customer actually may be someone that you know has no issues with gaming. They should be able to play. It's a difficult job. I think the goal that none of us want to restrict a casual customer, as we're describing them, someone who's betting recreationally. Is it theoretically possible that they get caught in a risk management review? Yes. But that's certainly not the goal of the program, nor is it the goal of any of our other monitoring programs.
Thank you, Alex. Do any other operators want to weigh in before I see Commissioner Skinner has her mic off? Corey, I see that.
Just one more point to your raising, Commissioner Maynard, of the illegal market and that we want to encourage them to come over to the legal market. I do believe that our ability to, have flexible wagering limits allows us to offer many more markets at, generally speaking, a higher wager limit for the vast majority of customers. That does bring users onto our platform. And if that ability were taken away from us, we would have to greatly shrink the number of markets that we're able to offer on the platform and reduce the limits for the vast majority of customers, which I don't think would be a positive thing for the legal regulated market. I think it would drive down revenue and ultimately drive down taxable revenue to the Commonwealth.
I appreciate you mentioning that, Corey, because one of my thoughts while the presentation was going on was, are they just offering too many markets to price the things accurately? So I'm glad that and I won't weigh in on whether I think it's good, bad, or indifferent, but I hear your argument. I see Caesars may want to add in here.
Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. Thanks for having us. I thought Jeremy did a very nice overview of the framework as well. We seek to provide our products for the vast majority of customers who view betting as a form of entertainment and enjoyment. And we want to focus on those players, make sure we provide the best breadth of markets and opportunity to get a bet down. We may limit certain players, and actually one of the things that hasn't come up yet is the automated bots that we also deal with. And when all of these customers wager, we're trying to manage liabilities and maintain the integrity of the games by limiting those customers that have that advantage knowledge or that have nefarious associations or present risk to our liability shifting in a way that we're just at times not comfortable with in terms of how fast it can move based on syndicates swarming a platform or arbitraging a price or taking advantage of an error. It's a tiny fraction of customers and bets that ever face individualized limits for us. And plenty of customers win on a regular basis. Last night, unfortunately, was a good example. And they stay on it as customers. And casual players, in my mind, should almost never hit our limits. But we often or can see casual customers' betting patterns change at times. And we need to be really aware that there are customers sometimes when you see those patterns change is because they're advantaged in some way or they're subject to an account takeover or usage by somebody else. And so there is a myriad of criteria that can lead to limits. Liability and risk management, our liquidity isn't endless. We may need to adjust the lines. It's very fluid in that situation from a trading scenario. We may have smaller markets where the risk tolerance is lower on a particular selection. There's also a lot of suspicious activity indicators, obviously, that we are looking for continually through our analytics and reporting. And that can be geolocation risk, it could be account sharing, it could be AML or suspicious activity. It can be bots. We find a lot of bots, especially on desktop, that are a violation of our terms and services, are trying to kind of fast trade and slam the system. We see collusion among customers and syndicates. Sometimes there's integrity concerns with certain players where we feel like they're using inside information where we're working with the leagues on understanding what they may know, we may know, or just other violations of terms and conditions like court siding and taking advantage of errors and feeds, because even even as we may use official feeds, they are not perfect. And so, we have to be aware of what's coming in our platform and manage that. We do see customers colluding too, where they're trying to take advantage of bonus programs and do offsetting wagers, and they're working together. And at times the game and just our own uncertainty about what's happening when there's injuries or lines are changing wildly near kickoff, or we think there's inside knowledge around some of that information. We just need to be really aware of that. In terms of just some I was just going to provide some examples. Like a great example of a
Do you
casual.
mind if I ask a question real quick?
Sure, of course, Commissioner.
Are bots a problem? Are bots a problem we should be thinking about with the KYC and so forth? That this is something you're throwing in here. Are you stopping them before they get in, or are they attached to legitimate players? You keep mentioning bots. I want to know a little more about that, and then feel free to finish your thought.
Yeah, often they're attached to legitimate players. If they're not legitimate, our KYC is stopping them, and we can't do that through more and more sophistication around understanding kind of where a player is coming from. But we're always obviously using advanced KYC solutions. But what happens is they'll register, and then they're using computer simulation programs to place bets in rapid succession. So it's not necessarily the player. It's how they're using computer programming, often on desktop, to place very rapid bets, taking advantage of, it could be errors, it could be price mismatches, it could be arbitraging. And they can do it in a wide variety of amounts and very quickly. And so those are the things where it's not actually necessarily human placing the bet, it's a computer program placing the bet. And those are things where there's a continual back and forth where we're using as much as we can from our RT. It's very sophisticated. So we're using our IT and all of our cyber capabilities to try and make sure that we're detecting those, working with partners as well. But it is something that we have to be aware of and pay attention to.
Feel free to finish your thought that I cut off there too.
Yeah, no worry. I was just going to say that, often, examples of this are, even markets like the NFL draft or season awards for players, like those are offered for customer enjoyment. We often don't win on those markets, and it's really meant to be for the fans that are driving entertainment. And there's, for us, we want to keep those markets up. We're not doing that to drive much return. We're really doing it for fans. But those are markets where if you don't have the right protections in place from a liability standpoint, there's people out there that will take advantage of you. And so most of our limiting actions are based on those factors. There are a certain number of limited individuals who aren't using the product in a way that aligns with our offering, and they are advantaged. And we may not choose to accept every trade presented in that respect, but customers stay on our platform, and they may be, as I think someone mentioned, they might be court citing in one instance, but perfectly fine in other instances. And we try and align our risk management in a way that allows as much flexibility as we can based on what we see, and just protect the vast majority of customers that are really, the casual recreational players that just want to get bet down on their favorite team or player.
Thank you for that. Commissioners will open it back up. I see Commissioner O'Brien has her mic off. And
I do. I know Commissioner Skinner unmuted just before me, so I didn't know.
Whoever wants to go.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm hoping that folks can speak to a little bit to the pre and post wager review process, right? So when you're assessing risk using those tools, how much of that goes into the pre-process before the wager is accepted, and how much of that depends on the outcome after the wager has been settled, right? So in other words, does a win factor into your determination to limit someone? And if so, how?
Commissioner Skinner, I'm happy to answer that question if that's okay. So we're reviewing player behaviors on the site in light of both the types of markets that they're wagering on, the types of wagers they're making on those markets, as well as the outcome of those wagers. And based on that, we get some insight to whether we believe the user should be limited, either because they might be, arbitraging or might be picking off pricing errors, or because they have a better model than us or more information than us. So that does factor in whether they're winning. And then make the decision for future wagers based on that information. Again, though, very small percentage of users ever face this, but for those users, it's based on that kind of information.
And just to add on to what Corey said, I agree. Again, I think we'll all tell you it's a very small percent of customers that end up in this review at all. But the result is generally incidental to the behavior. So it's the behaviors that we're looking at. I think a helpful stat to help get your mind around this, at Fanatics, nearly half of the small population of limited customers were actually net losing with Fanatics at the time they were limited, which I really think drives home the point that we're not looking at the results. We're looking at the way that they're wagering. Are they betting on markets that were priced in error? Are they court siding? All the examples you've heard already. That's really what drives the decision.
And so just to follow up to that, is it a mere coincidence then that an individual who happens to bet the exact same way and is under is then limited after they've won significantly, right? What about that behavior or that pattern there that raises eyebrows for the operators? Do you understand my question? So,
a pattern of winning in and of itself?
Well, no. So the pattern, I wouldn't call it a pattern, right? In fact, I would call it, in the scenario I'm describing, I would call the pattern, it's a losing pattern. But then that one wager hits and they're successful and they win. And it's a big payout. Is that a scenario that would raise eyebrows? Is that a scenario that would be concerning to your risk management team?
I can jump in on that one too. It actually isn't. Typically we see big payouts all the time on our platform, and for us, if a customer wins that, in that sort of scenario, often we're it's a great customer, and those aren't situations where we would limit someone based on one big win. No, we're looking, as everyone else said, we're looking at a pattern behavior over time.
And you wouldn't consider that a pattern that would signify that player is an advantage player, right?
No, we wouldn't.
Thank you, Commissioner Skinner. Thank you. Commissioner O'Brien.
Sure, thanks. A specific question about the court siding, and this is something that I had questions about when we were doing the regs and launching this a couple of years ago, which is there is a lag time. Check about the feed time, the lag in the feed. And to me, one of the solutions to the court siding may very well be shutting down when you can bet on that prop bet and in-game bet so that you're accounting for the feed. That seems to me something that could be adjusted on your guys' end to eliminate that area. So can you speak to why that is not a solution rather than limiting someone on court setting?
Commissioner O'Brien, I think that is the solution. And if our feeds were perfectly calibrated timing wise, it would stop that. But it is a challenge to get the timing just right, given all the technology happening on the back end to get the odds up there. And then also with an acknowledgement that for our users who are watching from home on television, there's a delay in when they're actually seeing the activity. So trying to get the timing just right so that you can actually place a live bet does create some difficulty in also getting it shut down at the exact right moment. And I'd say, on that point, to some degree, those court-siding users, it's not that they're doing anything wrong. Like they in the sense that they can do that. And I think it's on the operators to either lose the money to them or to fix their feed to get it exactly right. They can do that, but also it's our ability to manage our risk by stake factoring them if that's the way they're going to engage with the product.
So I guess as a regulator, one of the concerns I have from a consumer experience and protection point, though, is I would rather you fix it on your technical end rather than cut up a customer experience, which, as Commissioner Maynard said, would then potentially get them frustrated and push them back out into illegal markets.
On that point, though, if they do go to the illegal market and they do the same behavior, they're going to wind up with the same result.
And I would say we're dependent on using third-party feeds, official feeds in many cases by regulation, and those feeds are not perfect. And because we're actually limited by official feeds, it limits in some ways our ability to have a broader array of tools for usage. But those feeds are third parties; they're never perfect.
I know.
And there's errors, and so that does limit our ability to fully technically create a solution on our own.
Right. I'll be blunt that what I hear as a regulator is then maybe you shouldn't be offering the product if the technology is like that and fluctuating so much. Why don't you err on the side of outside to block it so we don't have the issue? That's a question I think for another day. Because I do think I would like to circle back. This is more to my fellow commissioners on that whole concept of lag and whether we need to be looking at that. I have a separate issue on notification. One of the frustrations that has come up repeatedly in complaints to this agency and publicly has been, while you described somewhat your process, there is no notification that then goes out to the consumer that you've now shut them off on in play or prop bets or whatever. And my question is, do you have notifications? And if so, what are they? And if you don't, why not? Because to expect someone to keep hunting and pecking, hoping they figure out what their limit is or where they're allowed to go, is also going to disincentivize them and push them out to a market and just create a frustrating experience. So if you could speak to the notification aspect of all of this, please.
Can I, do you mind, Commissioner O'Brien, if I tag on a secondary question to yours? We've heard a lot, our team has, that, well, brick and mortars do this with games all the time, right? They limit. I understand that, but I would say to Commissioner O'Brien's point, there's no better notification than you coming up to me at a table and telling me I have to leave and why you're telling me to leave, and you think I'm too hot for the table and so forth. Is there a replication of this? And so I tagged that on to her question. But anybody want to take that on?
Sure, I'm happy to address that question. So first, I'd say again, very, very few of our users are ever limited in this way, and very, very few of them ever show up at customer service asking what happened. So I believe that many of the users who are limited in this way know exactly why they were limited in this way. To the specific question of like, how are they notified though? When they go to place a wager that is above their limit for that individual on that specific market, they place the wager into the bet slip in the normal process. In the bet slip, it will show them this is above your limit and here is your limit on this specific market, so that they can see exactly what their limit is and wager exactly that amount if they so choose, and they can then know that they are limited, at least as it pertains to that market.
So they have to try and fail though before they get that alert?
They do. The difficulty on the alerting them is, if we were to alert them that they had been limited, it would not tell them exactly what their limit is, because the limit is a ratio of the max bet on each market that we offer. And so we're not going to send them an email with, every possible limit of all several thousand markets that we're offering at any one point. So it is a little bit tricky to offer them a communication that is actually useful for them.
Well, you could offer a communication that says, our trading team has flagged you for limiting. You're going to encounter it. I mean, you could, at a minimum, it sounds like you could alert them to the fact that that's going to be happening.
I don't disagree with you, and I think there's progress that we could make on that front. I will say though that we are to my mind, we are solving a problem that doesn't exist because we don't have users showing up and complaining about this issue. It does
Well,
not.
I can say we've had people complaining to this agency, however.
We
So
do.
I understand it's percentage-wise small in terms of what you're looking at your customer base, but, and my last question on this also is there's a lot of language about, you don't want advantage players, you're looking to get the casual better. Some of the conferences I've been at recently talk about sort of the way it used to be done is the sharp bettors were used to help place the lines. You've talked about maybe some of your bettors having more information than maybe your trading team setting the lines has. So there is a departure from how this used to be done to how it's done in this market. So it seems like you're not looking for people. This kind of speaks to Commissioner Skinner's question, which is it seems like some of the complaints we get, people start winning and they get shut off. And so there is a concern that I have in terms of advertisements go out saying this, you can make a lot of money. There's even an example, somebody goes out on one of your sites, they win a huge thing. It's tweeted out by the licensee lauding how much money you can win. And then they're limited the next day, purportedly for that very same win. And so this is a broader question that I have in terms of why not, like some of the people we've heard from, we got a letter late this morning before the meeting from an operator that doesn't limit, like you guys are talking about, and why that's not a viable model then. To not limit and use those sharp bets to then help you refine your lines.
So the way this works, generally speaking, is that the whole idea of limiting is you are still allowing wagers from those users. So you are getting the information from their additional information. So
but you're not
wager.
particularizing the limitation to a better as opposed to you're having limitations across the board to manage your risk.
We have both, right? So we have limitations across the board, and then we have limitations for that specific bettor. But even if they're only able to make a wager that's, say, 30% as much as the max wager for our usual users, we still see the money come in and understand the wager that they've made.
I know it seems like you have your cake and eat it too, right? You see the information and then you block the risk. Is one of the potential middle grounds here is that, there's a limitation to what you can limit, right? I mean, I know they did this in Australia where they're saying that you've got to allow a minimum win, basically, going forward. How would you respond to that?
I think that there's a limited, example in Australia and a limited example in Spain. And what we've seen in both of those examples is that the revenue has plummeted for both operators and as a taxable matter.
Yeah, I saw that for Spain. I have not seen the backup for that for Australia.
So
if you have that, I would love to have you send that along.
I'll see what I can find.
Yeah, I would also say in the most regulatory progressive market in the UK, they haven't done that either. And I do think it is hard because it is very fluid because there are limits that happen in real time based on game state liability. There may be limits based on certain things for a customer, but not other things. So it can come and go based on game state. If we see, we can accept something above a limit is not a hard line. A limit can be something that we accept a bet higher than if it makes sense at the end of the day based on where the book is for the market. So to send out a generic statement, I think could also be misleading because it doesn't cover the real-time nature of our business and the situation that we may be dealing with in any given game state or time or sport with any scenario. And we too, like when we don't see too much feedback, really very, very little feedback on this at all. But where we do see it is simply on social media where we know, there are some bad actors that are louder in that forum and often have, situations attached to them that, are different than just a straight limiting situation.
Commissioner O'Brien, I'll add, I think in one of the prior packets, one of the customers noted that Fanatics had sent a notification. Frankly, we found that to be a bit of a failed experiment on our end. All we got back from those notifications were rather nasty responses and didn't really see any indications of customers. I think to the point someone made earlier, they know why they're limited. And so we found that we don't send an email that customers have seemed to have found annoying. And we notify the customer in app what their max limit is. And I will note to Corey's point about, or in your point about, well, they have to fail first. I mean, the same is true for a non-limited customer. If they want to bet over a maximum amount, they're going to get the same message that says, you know, it'll show in our app, it will show in red, the maximum wager on this market is this. And it's the same experience for a limited customer.
Well, but that's different to go in and know the max wager on that is X and out there versus trying and failing to know what your particular maximum number is. I mean, that is a different experience.
In both cases, if the customer inputs a number that is above the amount they're able to wager, they will see what that maximum is.
Right, but then you also have max wagers out there in general in your markets, right?
Yes.
Just across the board.
Yes.
Right.
I see that Jake has his mic off. Jake, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think we went 4 or 5 topics since I originally put my mic off. But I'm sort of, I am happy to speak to a few of the things that Commissioner O'Brien has raised over the last few minutes, and then I guess like see where the discussion goes. Firstly, to go all the way back to the court siding example, which I think sort of set off a few other lines of questioning. I think this is a really good example of what benefits the most versus the few. So if we offer, let's say, a tennis market, for example, where there is some latency in the odds feed, but for 200 of the customers, a 5-second delay is sufficient to account for the latency in the odds feed. But then for 1 or 2 customers, they are able to beat the feed because they're at the game. Then if sort of the mitigation strategy is to say, well, okay, well, don't offer this until you have technology that can catch up with the 2 court-siders, then we can't offer the market for the other 200 people. And those are the same type of markets that are offered in the illegal market as well. So these are the type of things that we want to be able to provide, not only so like those customers can bet them on our site, but also so they have a good experience doing it. You know, another mitigation, instead of not having the market, might be having a 15-second delay instead of a 5-second delay, but that's going to be a poor experience for the 200 customers that don't need it either. And so of course, like I think the industry does need to, and we really do focus on always trying to improve the technology and reduce the latencies. But it is really a balance of providing something we really do feel benefits the vast majority of customers, and then in the situation where like we do have to limit someone for the risk management purposes, really limiting it to just what that behavior is. And so if they want to do something else on the site that isn't being at the tennis game and trying to beat the odds feed, then they're still welcome to do all those other things. I'm happy to speak briefly to disclosure as well, because yeah, I see also this is a topic of interest. I think we're open to talking about anything that would, you know, potentially improve the customer experience. Like that's what we're trying to be about here. The concern generally about disclosure is that the very small group of customers that are caught up in this, a lot of them do have some idea of what they're doing. And the concern is that if you increase the detail in disclosure, then it essentially helps customers develop strategies to evade the controls. And this is something, again, that ultimately goes back to potentially giving relevant information to a very small few, but then it ends up detrimenting everyone else. Because if customers are able to find more sophisticated strategies to beat the control because they know exactly the moment that's triggered the restriction, then we have to go and review, okay, do we have to remove more markets? Do we have to increase the latency? Do we have to offer worse odds to everyone, which takes money away from the majority of customers? yeah, so that's the way that we are looking at it.
So Jake, first of all, thank you for that candor. I really appreciate that point of view. Commissioner O'Brien, and then I think I cross-talked with her, so I apologize on that, Commissioner O'Brien. Could there be a general notification with maybe a ratio even outline, right? It doesn't have to say like, 50% on tennis and, 25% on college basketball, but some sort of you are limited and here's, ratios potential. Is there, and you don't have to, let me say this, I'm throwing this out here as an idea, right? As something for everyone to chew on. We're trying to solve a problem. We're not here because we woke up one day and said, we really, really want to cause an uncomfortable conversation with the operators. What happened was, to Commissioner O'Brien's point earlier, we do get complaints. and we also see the differences in the particular complaints, right? Like they're varying degrees. I think what we've showed as a commission is we're concerned about that casual bettor that gets caught up in the controls that you've really set for the non-casual bettor. And so the question is, what do we do? We're regulators, right? And as regulators, we got to come up with better ideas. We always want to build a better mousetrap. So help us think through that. And I appreciate you saying, Jake, that DK is at least willing to think about that piece. I see Corey, I see Sarah, Jake, whoever wants to go.
I was just going to say, for FanDuel's part, we are happy to work with the commission and staff to think about solutions that would resolve this issue for everyone. But I do really want to emphasize, it is a tiny percentage of users who are limited. And I believe that many of the users who wrote into the commission to talk about wager limits are not at all confused about what's going on or why they're limited. They know exactly why they're limited. And they would prefer not to be limited, but there isn't a confusion aspect with the vast majority of them. So we're talking about a small minority of a minority who might get caught up in some sort of confusion. And on that, we're more than happy to work with the commission and staff to think about what better transparency might look like.
I would, oh, sorry.
No, Sarah, I was kicking it to you.
Thanks. I would also say that any casual bettor who is potentially caught up in this analysis would likely find their issues resolved over time, because like we said, the risk management analysis is a fluid process. It's not an assignment that is indefinite to those individuals. And similarly to what Jake and Corey said, all operators here endeavor to operate with utmost transparency and in a collaborative nature with the commission. And so, one of the things that we are continuously evaluating is, are our house rules clear enough? Are our terms of service clear enough? We indicate different measures by which a patron could be restricted or suspended or have their account closed in the terms of service, which a patron agrees to upon account registration, and in the house rules, which dictate, the management of play. So if there's ways there that we could communicate more effectively with patrons to let them know how this potential risk framework works, that would be an edification to patrons as well as to the regulatory agency without potentially harming the operations and our ability to offer competitive lines and markets. That's another thing that we would be that we should all take into consideration. Are we being clear enough with patrons about what type of patterns and behavior may effectively impact them in a negative way? Because it is challenging to be able to communicate in specifics what limiting factors would be applied to an individual patron account, as every other operator has stated here.
Anything to add to what Sarah just said before I go back? I see Commissioner O'Brien's mic's off. Commissioner O'Brien?
So this is I feel like there's two parts to this query for me, and one we've talked about right now. The other one, the phrase that comes up a lot when we go to conferences, et cetera, is the whole ban or bankrupt. That there is this perception, real or not, that the online market that's out there right now, that you're either going to be enticed till you run on money, or as soon as you start winning, we're going to shut you off, we're going to limit you, we're going to ban you. So can you speak as an industry to that representation?
Can
Go
I say before you start? Some of the operators here today sponsor conferences that have had panels that tell us exactly what Commissioner O'Brien just said. So, Corey or Jake.
I can start and Jake can correct all my misstatements if it's all right, Jake. Look, I think we have multiple different teams and programs designed to protect against different risks. And I think we have the program that does wager limiting of the sort that we are discussing today is designed, quite frankly, to protect against financial risk for us as an operator. We have a completely separate team that is a responsible gaming team that has a proactive approach to identifying users who may be experiencing gaming harm and intervening with those users to protect them from responsible gaming harm that we take very seriously. And so I don't want the two to be confused. We very much want to intervene where users are experiencing any sort of gaming harm. We have reports running, we're looking at activity, we are looking at any interactions we have via customer service, and we will intervene through a variety of measures up to and including excluding a player entirely to ensure that they're safe where we can determine that they are at risk of gaming harm. We also have another team that's looking at some of the same data for money laundering purposes and making sure that there's not money laundering going on. So I don't think that, that allegation is true. I also think, again, like I know this idea of like ban or bankrupt keeps getting discussed. It is a tiny, tiny group of users who are getting limited. And so I think that really misstates what's happening on the platforms.
And if I could quickly add on, I think stats are important here. Well into the 90% of winning customers at Fanatics are not limited at all. So I think the notion that if you win, you will be banned is statistically incorrect. And then I would totally agree with Corey. We have a separate and independent process that we're very proud of with our responsible gaming team both in terms of the manpower, the resources, the technology that we use to monitor for customer play. I mean, to customers may seem like, big scary companies that they're adversarial with. We're all humans, and we hate seeing when players are experiencing gaming harm. That's something that we all take very seriously and care about. And so it's just completely incorrect to say that we'll let you, the minute you win money, we will cut you off, but we'll let you lose an infinite amount. We have a lot of people that wake up every day focused on player protection, and we're very proud of that.
Yeah, if I can chime in here, I can't state strongly enough that, BetMGM places responsible gambling as an utmost importance and pillar of our organization. And our player intervention model and responsible gambling program is a completely separate process and entity and team from the stake factoring mechanisms that are in place. As you know, player intervention models are required in Massachusetts. And so we've implemented the Markers of Protection program here in your jurisdiction, where we evaluate potential problematic play of our players, and any action or intervention or communication that takes place with those players with respect to their play behavior is entirely separate from the conversation that we're having on stake factoring. And I just want to make sure that that's abundantly clear here, because those two topics should not be conflated.
So to be clear, I'm not conflating those at all.
Okay.
And I laud the companies for their RG programs, but there is another component of what you guys have in terms of your management, which is the VIP programs. And so I was not looking at, and in any way suggesting your RG programs are not, a priority, but there does seem to be another side of this on the VIP where you're watching the same trends, and people get into trouble that way. So that's kind of when it talks about the bankrupt, the other side of it is, my concern is the VIP program that I think is another conversation to be had, on another day. But
I was just going to add on the ban or bankrupt, when customers are banned, there is a reason associated with it that is typically tied to activity that is either illegal, violates, something along the lines of an AML concern, suspicious activity, repeated violations of terms and services. Customers that can beat us, can get a bet down. They can bet with us, and at times they can bet over whatever limit is set based on the situation. So we're not banning customers for beating us. We're banning customers for other reasons that we should be banning them for. And often I think that obviously doesn't come out because it is something that is not public and something you would not disclose based on the specific situation. So, this is not a question of customers not being able to get a bet down and bet, on a wide variety of events and markets and opportunities on the platform.
So we have about 5 minutes or so. This has went by really quick. A lot of good information here to think about. I'll turn to the commissioners first, make sure we get any kind of, I won't call them final questions. I'll call them final questions for today. Commissioner Hill, have anything?
No, this has been very informative for me, and certainly a lot of information to digest. I appreciate all of you who have showed up today to talk to us about this. I think, again, there's a lot of perception out there that is happening, that's being talked about. We need to get the facts. Today starts that dialogue. We do get a lot of calls, more calls than you think, from our consumers regarding this very, very issue. And we just want to make sure that we're doing right, not only by you, but by the consumer as well. And the fact that you're willing to continue this conversation with staff and with us to see, in the notification, for example, I think is very important. That keeps coming up in conversation with the consumers that contact us. They don't understand why they were limited. They're not given a reason why, they're just limited. So that's something I think we need to continue. I think Corey said that you'd be willing to sit down with us and staff and talk about how we can do that better. So I just am very appreciative that you would talk to us today about this. Thank you for coming. And like the chairman said, this is not the end of the discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner Hill. Commissioner O'Brien, Commissioner Skinner, any final thoughts you want to get out?
Just again, reiterating Commissioner Hill's thank you to all coming in. I know sometimes these are uncomfortable conversations. I think they're necessary, though. You're talking about perceptions, right, being, inaccurate. And I certainly, and all of us, want to have the information if that's the case. And I think one of the ways to do that also is the data and the stats that you have. So in terms of your conversations with staff, I would like a huge part of that to be them peeling back the layer, right? To be able to say, all right, this may be the problem area that we need to hone in on, or there is no problem area at the end of the day, right? But I do think those stats are going to help staff then advise us on this as well. So I think that staff conversation with you guys has to include some of those specifics. But I thank you for all of your time today.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Brien. Commissioner Skinner?
Commissioner O'Brien took the words right out of my mouth with respect to the stats. I think that's going to be important. And I, for one, will be following up with the team in terms of them passing on an understanding of what it is exactly we'd be looking for along those lines. I appreciate as well your willingness to appear at the table today. As my fellow commissioners said, first of some additional conversation, although I think that sooner rather than later, I'd like to see some movement and closure of this discussion. We started talking about this subject over a year ago, and it's refreshing that we did see all of you today and that you were engaged in this discussion. And I would expect that would continue as we move toward a resolution.
So I want to give the operators, I see a few faces that haven't taken the opportunity to say anything, and I just want to make sure that they have the opportunity to do so. I'm sure they're more than happy to not take that opportunity, maybe, who knows? So anybody have anything else to add? any final thoughts? All right, so I will just say one more time, we appreciate you being here. We really are looking for fair and equitable solves to some of the patrons who are having an issue with this. I can speak personally to the fact that I have a lot of friends that use every operator here, right? In some way or some form. And most of them have a great experience. But we've all heard stories, right, of those who, think that they were maybe not given the best shake. And we're just here to figure out what's the solve for those people who truly weren't given the best shake. And what we heard today was that there's a chance that there's a small number of people that fall into that bucket. And so, A, we appreciate that you've acknowledged that, and B, appreciate, I know Jake and Corey and a few others said, we'll work on it. We'll work on it with you. So we appreciate that. I also want to reiterate that I believe, and I think I can speak for the fellow commissioners, if you're going to sports wager in Massachusetts, this group is who you should be sports wagering with, not the illegal market, not your bookie down the street. And so we appreciate you being here today. We will continue this conversation, and with that, we're going to take a quick break. We can return around 11:30. Is that right, Grace? All right, and everyone can feel free to just exit the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we see everyone here. This is going to be a reconvening of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. We're holding this meeting virtually, so we will take a roll call. Good morning, Steel Commissioner O'Brien.
Good morning, I am here.
Good morning, Steel Commissioner Hill.
Morning.
Good morning, Steel Commissioner Skinner.
Morning.
And I am here. We just concluded a discussion with our sports wagering category 1 and category 3 operators on the topic of wager limitations. We have invited representatives of the patron, responsible gaming, and alternative sportsbooks models to join us today to round out our conversation. I want to take this time to reiterate that we are going to have a respectful discussion. Please bring all comments through me, and I do reserve the right to interject, as well as my fellow commissioners. With that, let's begin with introductions. Brianne Durashall from Durashall Consulting.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we have David Hill with us.
Morning. Hi.
Feel free to tell where you're from.
I live in New York. I'm a writer and a journalist. I've been writing about gambling in the gambling industry for about 10 years now.
Thank you. Jeff Edelstein.
Hi, good morning. I'm currently freelancing in the sports betting space, previously with Sports Channel and Newsweek. Also, find myself limited at a handful of sports books here in New Jersey.
All right, and I will tell you that your mic's a little choppy, just so you know before we move on. Joe Brennan. Do we have Joe with us? Oh, we'll move on to Marlene Warner. Hi, Marlene.
Hello, Commissioner Maynard. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. I am the CEO of the Massachusetts Council on Gaming and Health and the operator of GameSense in the Commonwealth. Coming to you from Kansas City, Missouri, but here to join you and happy to be here nonetheless.
Thank you for working us in. We appreciate that. And then Richard Schutz is joining us. I saw him on camera earlier. Richard? All right. Just trying to make sure there's no technical issues. We are going to have to move on, though. We are on a tight schedule. So we'll do this. We're going to make sure. Let's see, we have a connection here. I see Joe Brennan. It looks like you were able to connect. We're going to move on, and they can add on as they get in. Okay, Grace and Mills and Joe, it looks like your mic's off.
Why?
Mr. Brennan, you are live. We can hear you.
You can hear me?
We can hear you.
All right, I'll keep the language clean then. I just can't see you right now.
Thank you. We can hear you. And then Richard Schutz. Looks like
yeah, my name is. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, my name is Richard Schutz, and in particular interest to this particular meeting is that I am the CEO of American Bettors Voice, which is essentially an entity that's desired to give bettors a voice, and our goal is sustainability. And I just want to applaud all of you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. So with that said, we appreciate you being here to help inform us on this topic. I'll kick off the first question just to get us started, and then we'll turn it over to our commissioners, fellow commissioners. If individual player limits are industry practice, and can I ask everyone to mute? while you're not speaking? That way I'm getting some background feed. If individual player limits are industry practice for those going on a winning streak, is there an opportunity to use this same logic for responsible gaming purposes? Brianne, I see you, and Marlene, I see both reaching for the mic, so we'll go with Brianne first.
Thank you again, and for the opportunity to come back for this roundtable to discuss what I believe is one of the utmost important topics of the industry at this particular juncture of time. You know, I listened to the last panel very closely, taking copious notes, and I think that was one of the biggest takeaways, right? A real appreciation of how much data drives the decision-making of the operators. And while I can appreciate and hear that they stated over and over again that about roughly 1% of folks are limited. You know, I'm looking at a stat that the National Council on Problem Gambling believes that about 5% of any active player base might be struggling with a problem. So for me, top of mind is two things. Are we using data in the same way to make decisions on limiting someone who might be experiencing gambling-related harm? And what are those percentages that the average operator is limiting someone for true responsible gaming concerns? If you recall in the last roundtable, I highlighted a real fear and something that I have seen in some jurisdictions, that responsible gaming is often a justification for limiting when it may not really be the truth. Having responsible gaming be used as a scapegoat is just as dangerous as not using the player monitoring systems and data tracking to truly intervene and to limit someone who might be experiencing harm.
Thank you for that. And I want to note that you know, we did hear in the first panel that, you know, the operators would say that necessarily it's not necessarily going on a winning streak that would cause the limit, but that is one of the questions that have been posed in the past, so that's why I posed it that way. Marlene, I see your mic is on.
Thank you, Chairman. I think one of the things that was fascinating to Brianne's point around the earlier panel is that they talked about working in the sub percentages of sub percentages. This is the world I operate in. We are not talking about the majority of people. We are talking about a very small percentage of people. There also seemed to be a distinction between VIPs and people with gambling problems. There's not often a distinction. Oftentimes VIPs do have gambling problems. And I think that was a true mistake to talk about the distinction between the stake. I think it was the stake factoring, which was separate from player protection. I would completely disagree that sometimes there's a lot of overlap there. And, you know, the commission started with the concept that they were going to increase the revenue for the Commonwealth while also mitigating harm. It's brilliant in having this forum to delve deeper into this. I guess one of the things I want to talk a little bit about is just thinking about positive play. And so the transparency that I think, you know, all the commissioners did a great job asking the right questions. And I think digging into the right, very specific areas, but it's around really thinking about if we are going to put the onus on the player, we need to also, per the Reno model, like we need to also ask the operators to own some of the responsibility here. So we ask, especially in Massachusetts, that we look at gambling literacy, we look at honesty and control, we look at pre-commitment, and we look at personal responsibility. But we need to also think about the onus being on the operators and thinking about that level of transparency as it relates to terms and conditions. And the good news is a lot of the operators talked about that is something that they would be willing to do more of, is to not just make it easier to follow, but maybe also breaking down and having a better understanding. One of the things we know is that the more information someone has before they gamble, the better and safer that they're going to be when they're moving forward in their gaming. So I think this is something that we want to continue to reiterate and dig a little deeper on. I'm happy to go into more detail, but that's kind of my initial reaction.
So, and I will thank you, Marlene. I appreciate that. And I know we will be turning back to you for your insights. I will open it up to the other folks who are joining us. Have how do you think this could be used potentially as an RG tool? And I know a few of you have written about it because I've read it.
Can I just jump in here on this? And my name is Joe Brennan. I'm the executive chairman of Prime Sports, which is a sports betting operator in New Jersey and Ohio, and soon to be a couple more states here, hopefully before the end of 2024. Not currently in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. But I think one of the concerns that we have with this topic about limiting, and it's always appropriate to have a discussion about responsible gaming. And we spend lots of time talking to the folks to see how we can do more and do better. The concern I have is in this discussion of limiting, is that this can be somewhat cynically exploited by operators who engage in the practice of limiting to couch it as like we're doing something that really is intended to be protecting of players. And I can't speak for the commission, but I know I still hear from quite a few players who really what they are is they're young, would-be professional players, and they are trying to make their way in this game and do it professionally. And this is one of the reasons that is given to them when they are shut down or they are limited, and that is they're being investigated for potential responsible gaming issues. And while, of course, we shouldn't take addiction, whether it's gambling addiction or any of its other comorbidities, lightly. I do have a concern when we're having a specific talk about player limiting that this has been so quickly cited by those operators as a reason for engaging in the practices that there are.
So commissioners, well, first of all, thank you, Joe, for adding that. And we heard Brianne mention that last time when we met in May as a potential issue. And I do want to say, Brianne, I did kind of shortchange you a little bit. If you want to tell a little bit about why you're here today, I'm sorry about that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I didn't feel shortchanged at all. For those that may not know, my name is Brianne Dora Shawal. My area of expertise stems in the problem and responsible gambling policy space, both nationally and internationally. And recently, my portfolio has expanded to just general consumer welfare. So it is a privilege to be here today commenting on this.
And part of that was because you joined last time. So I assume everybody else follows that like I do, but they don't. Commissioners, do we have, well, I see, Richard, I see you have your mic on.
Yeah.
And I've seen that you've written about this issue too.
Yeah, I write quite often. Thank you, sir. And I read what you guys do and follow you. And one of the commissioners is Commissioner Skinner. And I was reading something of hers that reminded me so much of myself. And it was the suggestion that we need to get down and dirty with the data. And many years ago, I worked for Mr. Wynn in his financial department. This is in the 80s. Our investment banker was Drexel Burnham, and Michael Milken was our banker. And they had a sign put in my office, and it said, it was a Sherlock Holmes quote, Arthur Conan Doyle quote, and it said, data, you can't make bricks without clay. And I'm probably going to try and dig that sign up and send it. We don't know what we're talking about, basically, in my opinion. And I didn't gain a lot of insight from the last discussion, as to how this all works. We have done some polling, and it certainly was not unbiased sample. It was done at Bet Bash and stuff, but essentially out of 400 and some samples, we came up with almost half that had been limited. And one of the discouraging things about that is we don't know why. They don't know why, and they're terribly frustrated. And I thought it was illustrated during the session where an operator said, we've never heard of this complaint. And I believe it was Commissioner O'Brien suggested that we get them all the time on our website. There's a disconnect there that's important, but we do not understand the scope of this program. And in the context of a regulatory authority, you have the right to get that data. And so in the same sense, you would go out and find a sports betting expert. I think you need to find data science experts and get really down and dirty with this. And I hope this meeting is just the start. And I hope what we learned at this meeting was we don't know very much about what's going on. And that hasn't fundamentally changed in the last few hours. We need not only on this thing, but how are complaints handled. And you'll be able to do some great comparisons between operators. And how long it takes to get your money out of the system. And you know, I mean, and you heard there just a whole bunch of things. And in the area of problem gambling, there's probably some pretty interesting data. How are limit increases done, both for the VIP and the problem gambling segment? Are they done voluntarily? Is it come from, are they approached by a host and stuff like that? And I don't mean to be a downer, but we don't know this stuff. And I think we just need to really get down and dirty with the data and start asking for the operators to provide this information, and then have a data scientist go in there and make sure that it's appropriate with regards to compliance.
So thank you, Mr. Schutz. I agree that Commissioner Skinner was right on the nose with that. It's good to get data. We love data here at the MGC, as you probably know. Anybody else have any comments before we open the floor? Mr. Hill.
Yeah, I just want to say that, you know, I've been working this pretty much all this year. I've been reporting a feature on the sports betting industry that'll come out at the end of the year. And one of the people I interviewed for the story was a consultant who does player profiling for sports books. And one of the things he told me was that he can identify a winning player in fewer than 50 bets that are under $100 each, and that what he's often looking for is whether that player is able to beat the closing line on a game, right? Whether they can get a bet in at a number that's better than what all the sports books sort of close at the end of the game, which is far different than what I think some of the folks were describing earlier about court siding and, you know, taking advantage of the sports book in one way or another. It's just sort of finding these good prices that are available. The reason I bring that up is that I also learned during the reporting of this story that a very small percentage of players are responsible for the vast majority of profits at these sports books, and that these casual players, the sort of sea of casual players, are not where the profits are generated. They're generated from VIP players. Whether this question that was sort of raised earlier about whether or not VIP players are in fact problem gamblers or not, I think is a fair question. I was at a panel at SBC earlier this year where this question came up, and they were discussing sort of ways to deal with, you know, sort of RG issues. And it was suggested that maybe there should be a deposit limit. And one of the representatives of sportsbooks said, well, it's no secret that our most profitable players are our high wagerers, so we can't really abide a deposit limit. And I think these two things taken together shows that if players are profiled because they're able to make smart kind of winning bets, and the players who generate all the profits for sports books are the ones who bet the most amount of money and essentially lose money. I think that the idea here is that if you get profiled for having any ability to beat the sports book at all, you're never going to be allowed to be a part of these VIP programs. And I've certainly interviewed people during the course of this year who have been invited to VIP programs and are no longer a part of them. And I myself was invited to one and am not a part of it either. So these VIP programs are not permanent. You're only allowed to be in them so long as you're profitable for the sports book.
Is it fair to say, though, that it doesn't necessarily mean winning or losing? We did hear that the last time. Would there be any other reason?
Well, what the person that I interviewed for the story, who profiles players, told me was that it's not about your net win or loss at any given moment. It's about your ability to win over the long run. I mean, this is essentially the same way the sportsbooks think about their own ability to profit, right? So they're going to identify a player pretty early on. Does this player have an ability to beat us over the long run? And that essentially means that a player is able to identify a good bet, right? I mean, it's nothing more than that. If they can identify a good bet, a good price, and they take it, If they do that enough, a sportsbook will profile them and take countermeasures. Those countermeasures aren't always limiting, but they will take countermeasures on those players. Sometimes they'll have other ways that they may deal with certain players, but that's what they're profiling them on.
Anything to add, Brianne?
I just want to say, I think this brings up a very important topic of VIP, the high value customers, but also really brings into question the compensation model for hosts that run these VIPs. It is no secret that in the industry, VIP hosts can be compensated based on handle. So if you're an individual who's wagering a lot, losing a lot, there's a reward for the host to continue that type of behavior with a player. It can be very dangerous and lead to very scary data sets like the one we saw of Connecticut, right? 71% of revenue driven from a very small percentage of the player base. So I think this really does bring in to question, or at least a discussion on limiting, some other important adjacent topics. Another one that comes top of mind is advertising. We see a lot about win, come play, win, come play, win, when in fact, actually, if I win and I win enough, I actually can't play with you. So from that consumer perspective, not necessarily problem or responsible gambling, to me, this really calls into question truth in advertising. Can I win with you? Or am I going to be punished for winning? And what kind of communication? How many times do I win before I'm cut off? And so there's that lack of transparency and, in this case, I believe, truthful and fair practices that I feel get called into question. And this, again, adjacent, but I think still relevant.
That's on that. Mr. Hill.
I just wanted to add to that it's worth looking at what these VIP programs entail. And often the main benefit that you get from being a VIP at a sportsbook is that you get deposit bonuses, meaning that if you lose all your money, you will get offered some sort of bonus to deposit more. If you don't ever lose all your money, you don't actually ever get any bonus or any benefit from being a part of these programs if you're winning.
And I see, Richard, you have your mic off.
Well, part of these discussions are a little difficult for me because I was in the betting industry for a long time, and I was not only in the betting industry for a long time, I was in a kind of an important place. I oversaw the casino at the Stardust, which was the movie Casino was done. Now I came after those guys, but at that time we had 11 payphones outside the building and they were the 11th highest revenue producing payphones in the United States. We knew betting. We took huge limits and stuff like that. And what we're talking about today is a fundamentally different industry. And that challenges me at times. And I think it challenges some of the older and more mature people that are around this industry. This whole notion of not wanting anybody smart is different. We took action from Billy Walters, and there were three attributes about his action. One, he bet limits, huge amounts of money. Two, he typically beat us. Three, he was an extraordinarily valuable customer to us because he allowed us to risk manage. The way the industry has shifted is that we are no longer in the risk management business. It seems to be that we are in the risk avoidance business. And the risk avoidance business means that if you've got someone that can jeopardize your bottom line, you're going to blow him out of the building. And they say it's only a small percentage. But that's kind of funny when so many people argue that you're trying to shut down the offshore market. This is a breeding ground. This type of strategy is a breeding ground for offshore stuff. And if you follow what's going on in Nevada, the illegal booking market is doing pretty good. They're losing $12 and $15 million in casinos and stuff. And that's been making the news a lot lately. That's going to continue as long as you have this new model, which is not sports betting, but more of a recreational or amusement model.
So I have a question, and it can be answered, I think, by anyone here that has knowledge. There was an argument that the offshore books are going to they're going to limit you too if you're practicing these same types of behavior. Is that something we've seen? Is that something we think's happening?
If I may, because I believe part of the discussion is supposed to be about alternative models that Richard just hinted at. Offshore is not monolithic anymore than the regulated market is monolithic here in the United States. There are offshore sports books that, yes, they are the equivalent of the recreational sports books that you see here in the US that would limit your action if you wound up being a sharp player. But the ones that are really the largest and the most successful are the ones that are more of an open sports book format. And that's the one that we are currently standing up here in New Jersey and Ohio, where we are market makers. We are price originators. We create the numbers that eventually the recreational sports books follow. We create them on our own. And when players bet with us, and it could be a sharp bettor that's betting anywhere from Billy Walters' $1 million to down to Joe Blow public on the street, maybe he's betting $1,000. We track our players who are betting because some of them are going to be smarter than us. And what we will do is when those players bet with us after they bet, we use that data to sharpen the lines of our own markets. We make our own markets smarter because of the result of those wagers. And that's really the way, and by doing that, you're able to maximize the liquidity pool that you take in. You're able to avoid any of these massive swings that apparently the recreational operators are afraid of. And you maximize your potential for the house win and house revenue. The model, whether it is both the onshore recreational sports books in the Massachusetts market or the handful of books that continue to do this offshore that are based on limiting, their priority really, their focus of their development is on marketing and player acquisition, such that the discussion of VIP programs and bonuses and everything being such a big part of what they do. But when they look at their play data, it's simply to play defense and to weed out these folks who either are winning or are showing tendencies to win. I thought it was an amazing admission by the gentleman from Fanatics who said that at least 50% of the people that they have limited on their player roster aren't even winning players, they're net losers. They just have shown tendencies to do that. And that's a choice that companies can make. But we don't think that that's necessarily in the interest of either the Commonwealth of Massachusetts or for an operator, because by doing that, you're kind of blinding yourself in one eye to the betting market. If you don't know what the smartest people with the most money are doing in the marketplace, do you really have a good product? The talk about all the many markets and the odds and how it's difficult for them to be able to run type markets up and down their offering, even in the smallest markets. Well, it's even more so when you're not going to allow people who can come in and make those markets better, make those markets sharper. It would be like offering a stock market where you just decided, well, we're not going to let Goldman Sachs participate in this market because those guys are too smart, they're too sharp, and they make too much money.
Can I ask you, Mr. Brennan, when would Prime limit a player?
We won't. And that's the point. When a player comes into Prime, whether the person is a professional player or they are a brand new recreational player, they are all guaranteed to be able to bet the max amount for any given market. And we post what those max amounts are on our bet slip. So there's no guessing. That's one of the things we heard a lot of talk about transparency from the companies that appeared in the first half of this meeting. But they lack transparency for their players initially when players really don't know what they can bet. But with a Prime and with a lot of these open, sharper sports books, they will tell you right then and there on the bet slip the max amount, like the max win for this market is $25,000, or the max amount that you can stake for this market is $100,000. So the transparent right up front. And we allow anybody who, of course, makes it through our KYC and AML standards up front when they register to be able to bet that limit, because a dollar is a dollar. If you're seeking to bring in $1 million liquidity on one side or each side of a marketplace, does it really matter if it's Billy Walters' $5 or Joe Brennan's $5 or Joe Public's $5 that you took on that side of the market? No, it doesn't. It's just liquidity. What does matter?
Would you remove a player? Sorry, I apologize. Would you remove a player? Okay.
No, because the players are, in essence, they're working for us in a way. The players often are, they have better knowledge or better models, or they're just, we have to cover hundreds of sports and thousands of markets within those sports. But we have players that they specialize. The joke is always like, the guy you really got to watch out for is the guy who specializes in Patriot League basketball, because he's going to kill you on that Bucknell Colgate men's basketball game. And that's the truth, is there are a lot of people out there that, because of their specialization, the models that they develop, the knowledge that they have, you want that knowledge, because it's going to make your market better for everybody who bets after them. It sharpens your price. It sharpens your odds for everybody who comes after us. Otherwise, what can be done, and this is what the recreational sports books do, and that is they engage in a process of moving prices on air. So they may see Prime or Circa or another market-making sports book on one of the odds boards change their price on a given game, on a given side. And because those recreational sports books recognize that, well, we take largely sharp action. Same thing with Circa, same thing with a lot of these large market-making books. So the guys who are going to bet big, who are pros, who are sharp, we take it. And we will move the line after they bet with us because we respect their opinion. They will move the line to whatever we just adjusted it to. Do they know why? No, they don't. They just move it because they know who we get our action from. But the ironic thing is this now makes them more vulnerable to manipulation, because while a sharp player might come to us at Prime and say, I want to bet 50,000 on the Eagles -3.5 versus Dallas at home, and we take that bet and maybe we'll move the spread, maybe we'll move it to 4 or something like that, because we really respect this player's opinion. And then all the recreational sports books then adjust their spread to 4. Well, maybe that's the price or maybe that's the spread that the player is really looking for. And he spent $50,000 to lose with us so he could get -4 on the other side of the market and go bet that for $500,000. And this is a process known as head faking. And what this all means is the recreational operators engage in a big process of defense against players. You heard them talk about it. They talked about advantage players. The translation for that is a good player, a good bettor, a smart player. They are saying that we don't want smart players. We don't want good players because we see them as a threat, rather than seeing them as a resource like we and Circa and other sharp sports books will, in order to sharpen our price and tighten our markets up. But to all this is, I would never push out a winning player, a sharp player, because they were winning. I would continue to try and leverage that player's wagers, the knowledge that we gleaned from that, in order to make a better product for us.
Thank you for that. Commissioner O'Brien, I see your mic is off.
I did. So I wanted to clarify and make a point, which was the representations that one of the rationales for limiting maybe something like AML efforts, but it would appear to me that the response to AML suspicions would be banning or excluding and not limiting. Is that a fair statement?
Oh yeah, that of course. If a player could not pass through the KYC metrics that we have, or the AML standards, the proof of the source of the funds, things like that, they would never get a start.
Right.
It's not a case of like, oh, well, they've been betting here all along and now we have doubts about their money. We're supposed to, as licensees, as operators, we're supposed to stop that at the front door, not in the living room. Okay.
Right. And then just to clarify, you set your own lines, right? You're not getting them from someone else, right? And then tweaking them?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I'd like to make one point if I can. This is Richard. And that this is like an art auction business. And you have very serious art auction firms that have some of the experts in the world going to them. And that's kind of the old booking model. Now you have an art auction model that says, if you know anything about art, we don't want you in here because you may take advantage of us because you may be smarter than we are, or you won't buy trash and think it's art just because we've got it dressed up well and stuff like that. And I really always found that comparison relevant. You know, if you're going to have an art auction and restrict players because they're smarter than you, that's a funny admission for a business to make.
Mr. Edison.
Yeah, is my microphone working better now?
You sound great.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just kind of following up on what Joe and Richard both said, and I know they're not here to defend themselves, but, some things I heard from the operators earlier, they're looking for things like where wagering patterns, are different. So maybe I bet $5 here and $1,000 there. So that might flag me. Maybe I'm doing that because I like the $1,000 bet better. Bonus abuse. I mean, bonus abuse to me, I personally have been limited at certain sports books. I can guess as to why for certain times. One of them has been betting bonuses that they offer every single day. I'm small potatoes. If I'm betting $100 on a game, I'm shaking. Okay. And I've been limited at like more than a half dozen books. Betting on less popular player props is a reason that they cited that might get you limited. Arbitrage is a reason that everyone said might get you limited. To me, that is the most ridiculous one ever. So if, Sportsbook X hangs a line at plus 110 and Sportsbook Y hangs a line on the other side of that game at plus 110, and I could bet both sides and make a few dollars on the side, I'm not sure why that would get me limited. Okay, because they're the ones posting the line. I'm just betting it. I'm not manipulating anything. I'm not moving anything. So, and just again, as I said, I wanted to piggyback on what Richard and Joe said. They are saying specifically, if you're smart, we don't want you. Okay. Now they also said if you're, if they think you're part of a syndicate, if you're betting errors, if you're, court siding, that I can understand. Sure. But like, just because I'm a little bit smarter, just because I'm looking for a little bit of an edge, that's what they're saying to get you limited. That to me seems patently unfair.
So, Mr. Edelstein, I will reiterate, I'm going to be very, very clear. I did not hear them say exactly that. I hear your representation of what they're saying, and I respect it, but let's try to make sure that we're not out here trying to catch a headline today. We're here to learn, okay? So I appreciate that. Commissioners, anything else to question upon?
One comment that was made yesterday, that there was a situation yesterday that came up in today's meeting, and it was made by David Purdom, who writes for ESPN. I think he's one of the most talented writers out there in the sports betting field, and he's been at it for many years. And he said, if you are a website and unable to monitor news and adjust your odds, you are offering too many markets. And that sounds like a real simple thing. But I mean, if you can't keep up with these court-siders and stuff like that, don't offer those markets. You know what you're saying is people may take advantage of us, because our technology is not good enough. That's a funny reason to ban a player.
That's a good point, and it made me wonder and I hate to focus on Mr. Brennan, but can you compare the size of your offerings to what's being offered in Massachusetts? That was brought up at the last roundtable. Let's talk about we can offer more to keep patrons out of the illegal market.
So just by comparison, those are large publicly traded companies. Ours is a brand new company that's now in its second year of operation. So by that, our scale is smaller than what they're doing, but we're expanding our offering every day. However, saying that, I don't think that there's an inherent limitation that they think, or at least they're saying there may be, if they offered such things as minimum wagers in being able to offer an expanded product category. It's really because of the type of product that they are focusing on now, especially the two large companies at the top, because they are in the public markets. There's a lot of demand from their investors that they push towards profitability. And so there's been a real focus on multiple bets, parlay bets. You hear single game parlays or SGPs. When you visit their sites or their apps, it's right up front. It's most of the content that you see when you come in. And what they're saying is we prefer that our bettors come in and they bet their wager have 5 or 3 or 10 dependent wins in order to be able to cash, rather than just a single game wager like we tend to focus on at Prime Sports, just at really large amounts. And so in order to be able to fill out those products, when the players themselves pick these. That's why they have these like vastly expanded like player prop menus. I probably somewhat derisively refer to them as stocking stuffers. When a player comes in and they're going to bet an SGP, a single game parlay, and they've picked the point spread and they've picked where they are on the total, the over or the under, what else are they going to stuff in there so there's more and more dependent picks, making the mathematics of cashing on that wager more and more set against the player. Now the players, they like these products, the recreational players, because if they win one, if I want a 14 pick parlay that I dump $10 in, I might come back with $100,000. So in that, it's like having a scratch off ticket or a lottery ticket. And that's the market that they seem to like, because it's pushing margin over volume, which is the model that sports betting operators typically have. Versus, the players who come to us, they tend to be sharper professional players. A lot of those advantage players or those syndicate players that you heard the other operators say that they don't want in their shop. The players that come to us, they know how difficult, just inherently difficult, the mathematics of a parlay are. That's why they just bet single games. It's hard enough to pick one correctly, let alone 5 or 10 correctly at the same time. So when they see a player come into their store and they're only picking single games, that's already a knock against them, because that's not their specialty. And that's not where they want to go with their business model. They want to get into higher margin stuff. These prop markets, these expanded player prop markets that you see, it's again, if they had a sharp player who came in and latched onto those markets, they would realize that they're overextended in their quest to create more and more stocking stuffers to put into these single game parlays for their bettors. They are getting out over their skis. They are offering too many products that they can really monitor in a real-time basis for changes. And I think that's the thing that was illustrated by Mr. Purdum's comment and what happened with that particular operator when they regraded that wager for being very, very much off of what the market should be. So for an operator like us, we know where we're profitable, and we're taking a walk, don't run, towards expanded player prop menus and other derivative markets, in part because we know which are able to make more money, which are able to generate sufficient liquidity to justify us hanging that number, hanging that market, but also because, again, the type of player that we attract doesn't need the stocking stuffers. They know what their focus is, and it's on large single game wagers.
Thank you for that. Marlene, I see your mic is off.
I just want to make a quick comment to Mr. Brennan's point, which is we hear every day through chat and through phone calls, but primarily through chat, from sports betting operators through the GameSense program. And I think one of the things we're hearing, I kind of in my mind think of it as this snowball effect, which is we find that players are getting involved and it's snowballing, and it's kind of moving so rapidly they don't always know how to stop. And maybe a bit to Brian's point, which is the advertising is just enveloping them, and they're not always, I'm sure, how to make those distinctions. And they do get in over their skis, I think, in terms of the engagement. So I think one of the things I just kind of can't reiterate this enough, which is, it seems simple, but the transparency and communication with the players. We talk to players, we engage with players every single day who can't get a piece of information from the sports books. They don't know how to get an answer from a live human being, whether that be through electronic means or on the phone. So I guess that's one thing I just want to add to this piece. The other thing I just want to be able to offer is that, one of the things that we are hearing a lot about is AI and the ability to predict, when people are problematic. And I think that, I don't know exactly how this would work, but I do think that there are opportunities for these sports books to think about doing a single custom review and thinking about the ability for customers, if they are starting to trend in a different direction, whether this is going to help with late wager limiting or not, I'm not sure. And some of the experts here would be able to tell you more, but being able to share their data through connection with the regulatory body and be able to predict this long before we get there, and be able to do it across many instead of making it a profit, a way to be in competition with one another. If we truly are caring about the field, but also caring about the player, then I think this is another direction for us to go in. So just two things I wanted to offer.
And commissioners, feel free to jump in. Can I piggyback on that, Marlene, with maybe David and Jeff or Richard? Notifications. Would they be helpful? Do you think that, the bettors that you talk with think about, let's assume for a second, right, that limiting is happening, it's going to continue to happen. Let's make that assumption before I ask the question. Would the notifications be helpful and more consumer friendly in your view? And what would a notification look like?
Let me tell you what I think that notification will look like. You have violated our terms and conditions. Understanding that terms and conditions can be over 125 pages of text, would demand a team of lawyers to sift through, and it is absolutely a tool that's used never against the book, but always against the player. I mean, that's what that communication would be. And their lawyers would give you all kinds of reasons why that makes sense. But when you have terms and conditions that are basically unintelligible by the average bettor and go on forever over 38 and 40,000 words, that's a little bit of a challenge. So that's a great model you're talking about, Sharon, but it ain't going to happen. You're going to continue to get that same kind of obtuse communication that you violated our terms and conditions. Not to be the pessimist.
And at the risk of getting scolded again, I think one of the reasons that people who are limited don't reach out and ask why, anyone, again, I'm just going to speak for myself, but I'm sure others can back me up here. Anyone who's tried to reach out to customer service at any of these sports books knows that it's not exactly the most fruitful endeavor often. And so it's, once somebody gets limited, I don't know. I've asked why I've been limited and nobody's ever responded to me. I guess it would be nice to know why. Maybe it would change my betting patterns at other sports books, but I don't know. I'm not sure how much of an effect it would actually have.
I wasn't scolding. You've not seen scolding. So what I would say is let me ask you this. Would it then, I heard an argument that was interesting to me. Would it then, let's say you got a notification. I'm a University of Kentucky basketball fan, so you cannot bet on college basketball, right? Or you're limited to 0.5, what have you. Would you then start as a bettor to seek out other offerings on the same book to try to, I'm just going to say it, potentially manipulate or take some shots at some lines? Is that something that would happen?
Well, maybe, but I mean, again, I'm in New Jersey. There's I think I have like more than 24 sports books to choose from. So I don't think I would start again. And I'm speaking right now as a recreational bettor solely. I would probably just be like, well, screw it. I'm done with Sportsbook X. Now I'm going to go to Sportsbook Y and see what happens over there.
Thank you for that insight. Mr. Hill?
Well, I think that one thing that I've seen is that FanDuel does have it where when you put in your bet, it tells you before you submit the bet what the maximum is versus other sports books that I think in the last discussion, Commissioner O'Brien was asking them about how it has to get approved before they'll reject it and how that creates this sort of fundamental imbalance or, unfairness in this sort of information competition. But I think having posted limits is clearly the fairest way that players see as the players believe that posted limits would be the fairest way to handle limiting. But, second to that would probably be being able to see what the limit is prior to putting in the bet, so that there's at least some fairness between the book and the player in that exchange.
So if I could just add on that topic, So we do post the limit in the bet slip. So when a player picks a particular side of a market and the bet slip is generated to the side of the UI, they will be able to see what the max amount to win or to wager on that amount may be. Now, for us, our pricing is dynamic. It's not like old school Las Vegas where you'd walk into the door of like the Churchill Downs or one of the old school sports books, and there would be up on a placard on the side of what the house limits were for a football game or something like that, because pricing changes. It's dynamic. We post our NFL matchups for the following week before the Sunday night NFL game that starts at 8:00. And when we first post that number, we may only offer it for about $2,000. But everybody who comes in who wants to bet that number will get that $2,000. Now, it doesn't remain static. We use something that's called an auto mover. So when a player bets, particularly if it is a sharp bettor, a bettor that we're keeping an eye on and whose opinion that we respect, if they bet that number and that price that we're offering on that, we may move the price after he bets. We don't do this. A person makes a bet, and then we're going to send it to trading for review. And then we're going to look through the Rolodex and see, like, okay, is this guy really smart? Should we really be offering him this? Yes, we're offering it, but we're going to offer it to him at a worse price or at worse odds, right? We don't do that. What we do is we take that player's information and we adjust it afterwards. But then through the week, our limits will go up. So maybe on Sunday night, it's at up to 2,000. Maybe by Wednesday night, it's up to 5,000 to 10,000. And maybe by day, the day of the game, Sunday, it could be up to 50,000. But the player is always aware of it on the bet slip, what that maximum amount is prior to being able to place that wager. I do think it's probably in this given environment, even for a sports book like us, which are willing to take high limits and not discriminate against those who we're offering it to, it would be very difficult to be able to go back to a digital format of that placard on the wall, like in the old Vegas sports book, that says, these are your limits all the time.
Real quick, I want to bounce something that David was talking about FanDuel. He's right. FanDuel, you'll put in your number and what you want to bet. I'll tell you what the limits are. What's interesting about FanDuel, and I guess it's kind of to their credit in all this, is that if you don't log in and just put in a bet, it'll tell you what the limit is. For instance, I just put in the Pirates today against the Marlins, the run line. The limit is 15,100 and change. Then I logged in to FanDuel and put in the same number, and now the limit's changed. Now the limit is $3,400, right? So it's telling me that I'm limited to about 20% of whatever the max bet is for any market, for at least for the Pirates or at least for baseball or whatever. So FanDuel, at least they less opaque than the rest of them. How about that? Is that a fair assessment?
Well, thank you for that example too. We appreciate that example. We were asking about it, but it's always great to hear it in real time.
One of the things that can happen is, and this may just be a perception, the guy puts in a big bet on a number and the bet's rejected and then the number moves, Now, there may be a variety of reasons why that happens, but it sure creates a lot of suspicion among players, especially sharps, when they put in a bet and the bet's rejected. And there was kind of a discussion about that during the operators' opportunity to explain themselves, and where they said we may reduce the bet and then move the number. They're not getting the information through Tree for free. They're just buying it on sale.
I'll leave that there. Thank you for that insight. Commissioners, we've kind of coasted off of a couple questions.
Yeah, I mean, really, you've drilled down on some specifics and they followed up on some of our earlier conversations. But, the prosecutor and me always ask the questions like, what we're asking, what we're interested in. And is there anything we haven't asked that you think we would need to either ask of the operators or ask of you to go forward in assessing this?
If I could, Chairman Maynard started off the first session and then closed the first session by saying that the offshore are not your partners, that the operators on this call are the ones that if you want to wager in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, that's who you should be wagering with, not with street bookies, not with offshore. So I guess the question that I would ask, if I was in your position, maybe of the operators, but probably also of yourselves, is if these operators in your state are limiting and shutting down winning players, not taking their action, what are those players supposed to do? What is their alternative? Because you have players that are willingly trying to enter a regulated market, taxed, well-regulated, visible market. And you have the operators who are talking about transparency and security and risk and trying to avoid the next Jante Porter incident. And they're standing there and they're saying, no entry. What is that player, what is that citizen supposed to do at that point?
And I will say, Mr. Brennan, point of privilege, that was the subcontext of what we were saying in that. And I heard it from my fellow commissioners too, was, let's protect, all of the folks who want to enter the market.
Mm-hmm.
So we appreciate that feedback. Mr. Hill.
Yeah, to that point, I just spent a week in Costa Rica reporting on the offshore market for my story, and I spent time with both regulated offshore bookmakers and paperhead sort of unregulated bookmakers, and I asked them the same question about whether or not they saw loss in their business from post PASPA. And what they told me was that absolutely they did post PASPA lose a lot of business, but that it has slowly been coming back, and now it's coming back even stronger than it had earlier on. And I asked them what they attributed that to, and they said it was because players are being limited, and that now they're seeing the way to capture business is to market themselves as a place that will not limit you and will take your bets, and that they're feeling optimistic that the business may come back to them. So to whatever degree this is all about stemming the unregulated gray and black markets in sports betting, it's this at least anecdotally is not helping.
I entered the gaming business probably before most of you were born. In 1971, I started dealing cards at night as a college student, and I've been regulated all the way up to CEO. I also spent 2 years on a PhD dissertation developing the Nevada model of how it came to be. I also have been a regulator in 2 different markets and whatnot, and I have never seen anything quite like what is going now, and that is the tail is wagging the dog. You people are regulators. You have the ability to request information in clear, succinct steps and have them provide it to you and have the ability to audit that. And I think that's where, as long as you keep talking about that, you're going to continue to be going around in circles going, what did he say? And I absolutely believe you need to just take charge. And look, I think the world of you guys, and I'm not always complimentary towards regulatory agencies. I've got an article coming out tomorrow that talks about just the opposite situation with regards to Las Vegas. How many federal indictments do you need among your large firms there? But you need to take charge of this, and you had this industry explode on you, and you had a bunch of regulators that didn't exactly understand either the internet delivery of gambling products or sports betting, but you're catching up and you can get some experts now. You got to grab control of this industry. And a lot of these operators came from other countries, which do not have, who we did not learn from because we're going through the same mistakes they went through. Or they came out of things like DFS and whatnot, and they're not used to being regulated. I see reactions to regulators now. I don't know what it was, but during my entire career for over 50 years, when a regulator wanted something for me, and I don't know if it was fear, respect, or both, but they got it. Because if they didn't get it, they were going to be upset. And that's what's needed to happen now. And I think so many of these agencies are insecure about not fully understanding either the internet delivery product of games or sports betting, that they're just sitting back in the background. I would hope, and I don't think there's a lot of agencies that are in the position you have, where you have kind of this innate curiosity and you're committed to doing the job right, it seems. And I just totally admire that. But you need to get after these people. You know, the talking needs to slow down and the data acquisition needs to start, in my opinion. Get the facts.
We appreciate that. And I will say that the fact that we're having this meeting today, and first jurisdiction that I know of in the United States to have this conversation, been having this conversation for quite some time, is something that I know I'm proud of, and I think all the other commissioners are proud of too. And you know that we love facts and figures. We're also deliberative, and we're a body of 5, now 4, and it takes us a while to get there, but we typically do. And to your point about the other countries, Commissioner O'Brien studied up on a couple other countries, and you heard that today. And we've been talking, Commissioner Skinner and I have been talking to the UK. And so, we're all, and others too. So we are all engaged in this, and we want to get to the right spot, because at the end of the day, our number one priority are the people in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That's our number one priority. Everything else is secondary. Commissioner O'Brien.
Nope, I think you summed it up. And just, you're probably getting to this, but I'll get my thank yous in to everybody for your time before you start going around.
So we'll go around. First of all, is there anything else? Commissioner O'Brien asked a great question, which was, what should we be asking, or what do you want us to hear? I'll turn to Brianne and Marlene too. Same question.
Marlene, I don't know if you'd like to go first. I do have a few. Okay. I think it boils down to me about truth, fairness, and transparency here, right? The reality of the situation as I see it is these are books that are built or drive their revenue from losses, right? That's the name of the game. And it's about, are the risks mitigation efforts that they're taking for their business and to limit their exposure coming at the expense of the consumer? And how much are consumers going into this relationship with eyes wide open? And I think that brings me back to the advertising question around things like the sports wagering catalog, which I believe we had discussed at the first roundtable, and my concerns around what they're offering, the lines on them, how much revenue is being driven by that, and if that is a factor in someone being limited. I think about money laundering here from many angles, but if the triggering amount is $10,000, then why are accounts being constrained in any way of profits less than $10,000? Does that come into play here? I'm a little bit worried about this data use, and I can appreciate again that there needs to be a consideration for risk mitigation for business. And I believe in free market and the opportunity for businesses to have thriving abilities, sustainability, but are we deploying enough of the same data obligations and risk mitigation for the consumer here? Where is the real loyalty? And I think that really trying to drive home, where is that line for truth, fairness, and transparency that customers understand what's happening, is really where I hope we can find more answers around.
Thank you.
So, okay, if I go now, Commissioner, Chairman. Thank you. I also want to just, echo Brianne's points. I think that advertising is a really key point and something we need to follow up on. And I think, Richard, brings up a really key point too, in terms of if no one else is going to get this done if MGC doesn't lead in this way. And so I know you all know that. And the reason that you've had 2 meetings around this is because you are leading in this. But I also want to point out that MGC also is always the leader in terms of player protection. And so when we see these 2 issues conflate, I do think MGC is the perfect entity to get the answers, but also to instruct other regulators as to how to have the right conversations and ask the right questions. MGC also leads, and we've talked about this around data collection and mining. And so while we see both in both sports wagering and in the casino bill, the ability to collect data, I think we still aren't exactly at the spot where we need to be in terms of collecting the right data, analyzing the data, and then using the feedback loop to come back to issues like this and others. So I would just kind of encourage that to be prioritized and pushed forward. And I guess the last thing I would say is, a lot of the conversation this morning was around integrity, collusion, a number of things. They were discussed as if they were separate and apart from gambling problems. And I think that is a mistake, right? Like, so I think when a number of issues came up today, and we really can talk about new players, and those are kind of in our social space, or, folks that may just be entering the market versus our player health prevention efforts or our responsible gambling measures, safer gambling measures, and putting those in place. But there's also elements here for us to deal with problem gambling. And so there was some distinctions made that we're just dealing this realm and not this realm, but there is a spectrum that is appropriate. People do enter the market in one spot, end up in other parts of it, and we need to have appropriate interventions across that. And I think the limiting, I think, is just one indication of many things going on with a player. And we have a responsibility, as the Commonwealth has asked the Gaming Commission and has asked social service providers such as ours to come in and help people wherever they are across that. So I guess this is just kind of a general point on this overall topic. And again, thank you for having us be included in this conversation.
Thank you. Any other comments? Before I kick it off to my commissioners to say their thank yous. All right. Oh, Brianne, you did have another. I'm sorry about that.
I just want to reinforce what Marlene is saying. Hopefully I'm not over disclosing here. It's no secret that I try to work with a variety of stakeholders within this ecosystem, operators included. When an operator brings me in to do advisory work on the topic of problem and responsible gambling, some of the very first individuals I ask to engage with are those that are running VIP and customer service. So while I absolutely do not question, to Commissioner O'Brien's point earlier, that no one is calling into question the value or the validity or efficacy of RG programs, to Marlene's very important point here, the more they are kept in a silo, the more problems could be not only percolating, but enabled to happen in a book undetected. I know that there is this cultural fear that good RG means prevention of play, which translates to prevention of revenue. But the more that we can stop siloing these issues, not meaning that everything is an RG or a PG issue, as much as I'd love to say it is not, the more they become inextricably linked to the overall corporate structure, I think the better benefit both businesses, states, and consumers have as an end result. And I really applaud Marlene. I think her point is really important here.
The good news is we hear information sometimes in silos, but we don't think of information in silos. And Marlene knows that, and Brianne knows that too, of the commission. Commissioners.
Nothing to add, Mr. Chairman, except to say thank you. This has been a great day of information on, the operators as well as this portion of the meeting. And I appreciate Marlene, Brianna, and Dave, and Jeff, and Joe, and Richard for coming forward. You've given us a lot of information that I think we can use moving forward and will help us in our very next steps as we continue to have dialogue about this issue. So thanks for coming in today. Very, very good information for us.
Thank you.
I also want to add my thanks, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, to our expert panelists. Thanks for participating in this roundtable. We did get some really terrific information, and so we appreciate your support and contribution to this process.
Commissioner Skinner, I know
And
Commissioner
also,
O'Brien.
just, yeah, in addition to sort of reiterating the thank you, I know as tedious as it may be that we have to discuss this and process together in public, we can passively receive in one shot from anybody that wants to communicate with us. And so to anybody that participated in this or is listening as well, if there's information that you want to provide, that does get disseminated to all 5 of us simultaneously. We may have to wait to convene to discuss it as a group, but that doesn't mean that if you come upon something after this meeting, please feel free to forward it to us.
That's a great point, Commissioner O'Brien. I agree. So I reiterate what my fellow commissioners have said. I thank everyone for joining us. It's been very informative, just like the last session was, and taken in its totality, super informative. We look forward to more discussions to follow. I know that patrons and those who follow the commission's work are eager for quick determinations. But we are a deliberative body, and we will not sacrifice getting an issue right just for expediency's sake. And so just continue to stay tuned, continue to give us information. We will continue to do our duty and meet. Before I ask for a motion to adjourn, I do have to ask my fellow commissioners, because it's on the agenda, anything else that we didn't anticipate today or any commissioner updates? All right, thanks again, everyone. I think that about wraps us up. Do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Brien.
Aye.
Commissioner Hill. Aye. Commissioner Skinner.
Aye.
And I vote yes. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We appreciate it.